"Don't dig there, Rex, there's nothing left worth finding." The words left Daniel Hayes's mouth like a tired breath, barely louder than the wind brushing through the bare oak trees behind his house, but Rex didn't listen. He never did when something mattered. The German shepherd's paws tore into the damp earth with a frantic urgency, claws scraping, dirt flying, his low growl vibrating through the quiet yard like a warning Daniel couldn't yet understand. The porch light flickered behind them, casting long, trembling shadows across the uneven ground, and for a moment Daniel just stood there, shoulders slumped, hands buried deep in the pockets of a worn-out jacket that still smelled faintly of gun oil and desert dust, the same jacket he wore the day everything fell apart, the day the papers were signed, the day his wife walked away with half his life and all the parts that made the house feel like home. Now it was just walls and silence, too big for one man and a dog, too empty for memories that refused to stay buried. He exhaled slowly, watching Rex dig like the world depended on it. "What is it, boy?" he muttered, stepping closer, boots sinking slightly into the soft ground. The air carried that cold early spring bite, the kind that lingered in your bones, the kind that reminded you winter hadn't fully let go. Rex barked once, sharp and urgent, then dug faster, his body tense, focused, as if he had locked onto something invisible, something alive. Daniel's chest tightened, a feeling he hadn't felt in a long time creeping in. Not fear, not quite, but something close to it, something that pulled him forward despite every instinct telling him to turn back. He crouched down beside the dog, brushing away loose dirt with his gloved hands. The soil was colder than it should have been, damp, recently disturbed. His fingers paused mid-motion, his breath catching just slightly as Rex suddenly stopped digging and stepped back, ears pinned forward, eyes locked on the small patch of exposed ground. The world seemed to hold its breath, even the wind fell quiet. Daniel leaned in, his heartbeat slow but heavy, and that's when he saw it, not clearly, not all at once, just a faint shape beneath the dirt, something that didn't belong to roots or stone, something too small, too still. His pulse quickened, training kicking in before thought could catch up. "Hey, I got you," he said softly, voice steady now, the way it used to be when everything depended on staying calm. His hands moved carefully, deliberately, brushing away more soil, revealing fabric first, worn, damp, then something else, something that made his throat tighten. Rex let out a low whine, stepping closer again but not touching, as if he understood the weight of the moment. Daniel swallowed hard, the quiet pressing in around them, thick and heavy, and just as his fingers uncovered a little more, something shifted, barely noticeable, but enough to change everything, enough to remind him that maybe, just maybe, there was still something left in this world worth finding. Daniel's breath steadied, but his hands did not stop moving, each motion careful, controlled, the way he had been trained years ago when panic was the one thing that could cost a life. The dirt came away in soft clumps now, revealing more of the small form beneath, a thin sleeve, pale fabric soaked from the cold ground, then a shoulder, too small, far too small to belong out here alone. "Easy, you are okay," he murmured, not knowing if the words were for whoever lay beneath his hands or for himself. Rex shifted beside him, whining low, his tail stiff, eyes never leaving the spot as if guarding it from the world. Daniel brushed away the last layer of soil from the upper body and froze for half a second when he saw her face, a young girl, no older than 8, her skin pale against the dark earth, her hair tangled with bits of leaves and dirt, her eyes closed but her lips parted slightly. A faint breath barely visible in the cold air. Relief hit him sharp and sudden. "She is breathing," he whispered, voice rough, almost disbelieving. His training snapped fully into place now, pushing everything else aside, the past, the loneliness, the emptiness, all of it replaced by a single, clear purpose. He slid one arm gently beneath her shoulders, the other supporting her back, lifting her carefully from the ground. She was light, too light, like she had not eaten properly in days. Rex stepped back just enough to give him space, but stayed close, circling once before settling at Daniel's side, alert, protective. Daniel carried her toward the house, his boots moving faster now across the uneven yard, the porch light growing brighter with each step. The door creaked open as he pushed it with his shoulder. The familiar emptiness of the house greeting him again, but it felt different now, less hollow, less silent. He laid her gently on the worn couch, the same one he had slept on more nights than he cared to count, then moved quickly, grabbing a blanket from the chair, draping it over her small frame, his hands checked for warmth, for signs of responsiveness, his movements precise, steady. He leaned closer, watching her chest rise and fall, slow but consistent. "You are safe," he said quietly, though she did not stir. Rex padded over and sat near the couch, his head tilted, ears forward, as if waiting for her to wake. Daniel reached for a glass of water, setting it on the table nearby, then paused, his gaze catching something around her wrist, a thin bracelet, worn but distinct. He frowned slightly, recognizing that it did not match the rest of her worn appearance. It looked cared for, important. He pushed the thought aside for now, focusing instead on what mattered. He pulled a chair closer and sat down, elbows resting on his knees, watching her, listening to the quiet rhythm of her breathing. The ticking of the old clock on the wall filled the room, each second stretching longer than the last. Rex let out a soft huff and lowered himself to the floor, but his eyes never closed. Minutes passed, maybe more. Daniel did not move, did not look away, and then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, her fingers twitched beneath the blanket. His body tensed instantly, leaning forward, his voice softer now, steadier than before. "Hey, you are okay, you are not alone." The words hung gently in the air, and for the first time since he had stepped back into this house, the silence did not feel empty anymore. It felt like something waiting to begin. Her fingers twitched again, more noticeable this time, and Daniel leaned closer, his breath held without realizing it, watching as her eyelids fluttered slightly, not fully awake, not yet, but close enough to pull him deeper into the moment. "That is it. You are doing just fine," he said softly, his voice calm and even, the same tone he had used in situations where every second mattered. Rex shifted on the floor, rising slowly, his ears lifting as he stepped closer to the couch, his presence steady, grounding. The girl's brow furrowed faintly as if she could feel the warmth around her now, the safety replacing whatever cold silence had held her before. Daniel reached for the edge of the blanket, adjusting it gently around her shoulders, careful not to startle her. Then her eyes opened, just a sliver at first, unfocused, searching. They moved slowly across the room, past the dim light, past the unfamiliar walls, until they landed on him. And everything in her expression changed, not panic, not exactly, but something guarded, something that had learned not to trust too quickly. She did not speak, did not move, just stared, her small hand gripping the blanket tighter. Daniel did not rush, did not reach for her again. He simply stayed where he was, giving her space. "You are safe here," he said quietly, each word deliberate, steady. "My name is Daniel. This is my home." Her eyes flicked briefly toward Rex as he stepped into view, his tail low, his posture calm, not threatening, just present. She watched him for a moment, then looked back at Daniel. Her voice when it came was barely above a whisper, dry, uncertain. Where is this?" Daniel exhaled slowly, relieved to hear her speak. "You are just outside of town, about 5 miles from the main road," he answered, keeping his tone simple, clear. She swallowed, her gaze shifting again, taking in the room as if measuring it, mapping it, looking for exits, for danger, for anything familiar. "I have to go," she said suddenly, her voice still weak, but firm in a way that did not match her small frame. Daniel's brow tightened slightly, not in frustration, but in concern. "You are not in any condition to go anywhere right now," he replied gently. She shook her head, a small, determined movement. "I cannot stay. They will find me." The words hung in the air, quiet but heavy. Daniel felt something shift inside his chest, a weight that had nothing to do with his past and everything to do with the moment in front of him. He leaned back slightly, giving her more room, his hands resting open on his knees, showing he meant no harm. "No one is coming here tonight," he said, his voice calm, grounded. "You are safe for now, that is what matters." She hesitated, her fingers loosening just slightly on the blanket, her eyes searching his face for something, maybe truth, maybe reassurance, maybe a reason to believe him. Rex let out a soft breath and slowly lowered himself beside the couch, resting his head near the edge, close enough for her to see, not touching, just there, steady and patient. The girl's gaze drifted to him again, her expression softening by a fraction. Daniel noticed, and for the first time since she opened her eyes, the tension in the room eased just enough to breathe. He reached for the glass of water and held it out, stopping halfway, waiting for her to decide. After a brief pause, she took it with trembling hands, sipping carefully, as if unsure how long the comfort would last. Daniel watched quietly, then his eyes moved again to the bracelet on her wrist, the small detail catching the light, something about it still not fitting, still not making sense. And as he looked back at her, really looked this time, he realized this was not just a girl who had been lost in the woods, this was a story that had not yet been told, and somehow, without planning it, without wanting it, he had just stepped right into the middle of it. The room stayed quiet after her words, but the meaning lingered, heavy and unspoken. Daniel did not interrupt, did not push, he simply watched her, the way he had learned to observe before acting, every small movement telling its own story, her grip on the glass, the way her shoulders remained tense beneath the blanket, the way her eyes kept drifting toward the door as if expecting it to open at any second. "Who are they?" he asked gently, not demanding, just offering the question. Into the space between them, she froze slightly, the glass pausing halfway to her lips, her eyes lowering instead of meeting his. Silence answered him first, long and deliberate, then she shook her head, a small, firm refusal. "I cannot say," she whispered. Daniel nodded once, accepting it without challenge. Trust was not something you pulled from someone, it was something you waited for, something you earned. He leaned back in the chair again, giving her room to breathe. "That is okay," he said quietly, "you do not have to tell me anything you are not ready to share." Her shoulders eased, just a fraction, the tension loosening enough to notice. Rex shifted closer, his head resting gently against the side of the couch now, close enough that she could reach him if she wanted, but not close enough to overwhelm her. Her gaze dropped to him again, and after a moment, her fingers moved, hesitant at first, then slowly brushing against his fur. Rex did not move, did not react beyond a soft exhale, steady, patient, the kind of presence that asked for nothing and offered everything. Daniel watched the interaction carefully, noting how her breathing began to slow, how her posture softened, how the guarded look in her eyes dimmed just slightly. "He found you," Daniel said, nodding toward Rex, "out back. Would not stop digging until I came over." Her eyes flickered with something new then, surprise, maybe even a hint of disbelief. "He found me," she repeated softly, as if testing the words. Daniel gave a small nod. He has a way of knowing when something is not right. Her hand remained on Rex's for a moment longer, then pulled back, retreating into the blanket again. The room fell quiet once more, but this time it felt different, less strained, more thoughtful. Daniel's gaze returned to the bracelet on her wrist, the detail still pulling at his attention. He leaned forward slightly, careful not to startle her. "That bracelet, where did you get it?" he asked. Keeping his tone neutral, curious rather than suspicious, her reaction was immediate. Her hand moved instinctively to cover it, pulling her sleeve down as much as she could, her eyes sharp again, alert. "It is mine," she said quickly, almost defensively. Daniel raised his hand slightly, a calming gesture. "All right. I believe you," he replied, his voice steady. "I was just asking." She studied him for a moment, searching again, weighing something unseen, then her gaze dropped, her fingers still curled protectively around her wrist. The silence stretched, broken only by the faint ticking of the clock and the quiet hum of the heater struggling against the night air. Daniel exhaled slowly, shifting his attention away from the bracelet, choosing not to press further. Not yet. Instead he stood carefully, moving toward the small kitchen. "You need something warm," he said over his shoulder. "Soup is about all I have, but it will help." She did not respond right away, but she did not refuse either, and that was enough. Daniel poured the soup into a pot, the sound of it heating filling the space with something almost unfamiliar, something close to normal, something close to care. He glanced back once, seeing her still sitting there, wrapped in a blanket, Rex beside her like a quiet guardian, and for the first time in a long time, the house did not feel like a place he was waiting to leave, it felt like a place someone had finally arrived. The smell of warm soup slowly filled the house, soft and steady, wrapping around the quiet like something familiar, something human. Daniel poured it carefully into a bowl, testing the heat with a slight tilt before carrying it back into the living room, his steps measured, not wanting to startle her. She had not moved from the couch, still wrapped in the blanket, still watching everything with that same cautious awareness. But her shoulders had lowered just enough to show she was no longer bracing for something immediate. Rex remained at her side, his presence constant, his breathing slow and even. Daniel crouched slightly as he approached, keeping himself at her level, not above her, not imposing. "It is hot, so go slow," he said, setting the bowl on the table within her reach, then leaning back again to give her space. She looked at the bowl, then at him, hesitation flickering across her face, as if even something as simple as food required permission. Daniel gave a small nod. "It is yours," he added quietly. That was enough. She reached forward slowly, her hand still unsteady but determined, lifting the spoon with careful focus. The first sip was cautious, almost testing, then something shifted, not dramatic, not sudden, just a quiet recognition, warmth, safety. She took another, then another, each movement a little less guarded than the last. Daniel watched without interrupting, letting the moment unfold. The clock ticked softly behind him. Rex adjusted slightly but did not move far, his eyes flicking between them as if keeping watch. After a few minutes, the girl lowered the spoon, her breathing steadier now, her eyes no longer scanning the room quite as sharply. "What is your name?" Daniel asked gently, the question simple, offered without pressure. She hesitated again, but this time it was different, shorter, less defensive. "Lily," she said quietly, the name barely above a whisper, but it settled into the room with a weight that mattered. Daniel nodded once. "Lily," he repeated, as if anchoring it there. "That is a good name." She looked down at the bowl again, but a faint shift in her expression suggested something softer beneath the caution. Daniel leaned back into the chair, exhaling slowly. "You can stay here tonight," he continued, his voice calm and certain. "No one is going to force you to do anything. And no one is coming through that door without me knowing first." Lily's eyes lifted again, meeting his, searching for any sign of doubt, of hesitation, but there was none, only quiet certainty, the kind that came from someone who had stood in worse places and made harder decisions. She nodded once, small but real, her fingers tightening slightly around the edge of the blanket, as if holding on to something she was not ready to name. Daniel's gaze drifted again, almost unconsciously, back to the bracelet on her wrist, the details still out of place, still unanswered, but he said nothing, not now. Instead he stood slowly, moving toward the hallway. "There is a spare room," he said, glancing back. "Nothing fancy, but it is warm, and it has a bed that is better than that couch." Lily did not move right away, her eyes flicking toward the hallway, then back to Rex, then to Daniel, the hesitation still there, but thinner now. She looked down at Rex, and for a brief moment, her hand rested on his head again, a quiet, grounding touch. Then she slid off the couch carefully, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders like a shield. Daniel stepped aside, giving her a clear path, not guiding, not leading, just allowing. Rex stood as well, moving with her, staying close but not crowding. They walked down the hallway together, the floorboards creaking softly beneath their steps. Daniel opened the door to the spare room, flicking on the light. The room was simple, a bed, a dresser, a window with thin curtains, but it was clean, it was safe. Lily paused at the doorway, looking in, taking it all in slowly, as if measuring whether this place could be trusted. Daniel stayed a few steps back, giving her that space. "You can close the door if you want," he said quietly, "or leave it open. Whatever makes you feel better." She stepped inside, just one step at first, then another, her eyes moving across the room. Rex stopped at the threshold, sitting down just outside, as if guarding the space without entering it. Lily turned slightly, looking back at Daniel, her voice soft again, but clearer than before. "Thank you," she said, and it was the first time it did not sound like fear speaking, but something else, something closer to trust. Daniel gave a small nod, nothing more, because anything more might have been too much, and as she slowly closed the door halfway, leaving it just open enough to see the hallway light, Daniel stood there for a moment longer, listening. The house quiet again, but no longer empty, not anymore. The house settled into a deep, unfamiliar quiet as the night stretched on, the kind of quiet that was not empty but watchful. Daniel remained in the hallway for a moment longer after Lily closed the door halfway, his eyes fixed on that thin line of light spilling into the dark, as if it marked a boundary between two fragile worlds. Then he turned slowly, walking back toward the living room, each step measured, his body moving out of habit while his mind stayed behind that door. Rex did not follow him this time. Instead the dog remained seated just outside Lily's room, ears alert, head slightly tilted toward the faint sounds within. Daniel noticed but said nothing, only giving a small nod as if acknowledging an unspoken agreement. The living room felt different now, the same worn furniture, the same dim lamp casting long shadows across the walls, but something had shifted, something subtle yet undeniable. He sat down in the chair again, leaning forward with his hands clasped loosely, his gaze drifting toward the dark window. Beyond it the trees stood still under the pale moonlight, the patch of disturbed earth barely visible in the distance. He exhaled slowly, his chest rising and falling with a weight he had not expected to feel again, not like this, not for someone he had just met. The clock ticked steadily behind him, each second grounding him in the present, pulling him away from memories that tried to surface. He rubbed a hand over his face, the roughness of his skin catching against his palm, and for a brief moment, the silence pressed in again, but it did not suffocate, it held, it waited. A faint sound broke through it, soft, almost too quiet to notice. Daniel lifted his head slightly, listening. It came again, a small shift, the creak of a bed, the kind of sound that carried more than movement. It carried restlessness, uncertainty. He stood without thinking, moving back down the hallway, his steps slower this time, careful, respectful. He stopped just short of the door, the light still spilling through the narrow opening. Rex remained in place, his eyes flicking up to Daniel briefly before returning to the door. Daniel did not knock, did not open it, he simply stood there, close enough to be present, far enough to not intrude. "You are okay," he said quietly, not expecting a response, just letting the words exist where they might be needed. The room beyond stayed silent for a moment, then a faint rustle, the blanket shifting, and then her voice, softer than before but clearer. "I am not used to beds," Lily said from inside, the words simple but carrying a truth that lingered. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly, not from anger, but from something deeper, something heavier. "You do not have to sleep if you are not ready," he replied gently, "you can just rest, that is enough." Another pause followed, longer this time, then the faintest sound of movement closer to the door. It opened just a little more, enough for her to look out. Her eyes met his, still cautious, still searching, but not as distant as before. "Will you still be here?" she asked, the question fragile, almost hesitant to exist. Daniel did not hesitate. "Yes," he said, his voice steady, certain. "I am not going anywhere." Her gaze held his for a second longer, as if weighing the truth of that promise, then she nodded slightly, retreating back into the room, the door remaining slightly more open than before. Rex shifted then, lowering himself to the floor, settling in as if he had made his decision for the night. Daniel stepped back slowly, giving them both space, returning once more to the living room, but this time he did not sit right away. Instead he paused by the window, looking out at the dark yard, at the place where everything had changed, his reflection faintly visible in the glass. A man who had come back with nothing, now standing in a house that was no longer empty. He let out a quiet breath, not heavy, not hollow, just real, and as he finally sat down again, the silence around him felt different, not like something waiting to break, but like something slowly beginning to heal. Morning arrived slowly, not with noise but with a quiet shift in the light that crept through the thin curtains, turning the dark edges of the room into something softer, something real. Daniel had not slept much, he had remained in the chair for most of the night, drifting in and out of a shallow rest, the kind that never fully lets go, every small sound pulling him back, every creak of the house reminding him that he was not alone anymore. He opened his eyes as the first pale glow reached across the floor, his body stiff but alert, his instincts still tuned to the space around him. He turned his head slightly toward the hallway, listening. The house was still, but not empty, never empty now. He stood slowly, stretching his shoulders just enough to ease the tension, then walked toward the kitchen, the floorboards soft beneath his steps. He poured water into a kettle, the faint hum beginning to fill the silence, something simple, something grounding. As he reached for a cup, a small sound came from the hallway, light footsteps, hesitant but moving. He turned just as Lily appeared at the edge of the doorway, still wrapped in the blanket, her hair slightly less tangled now but her eyes still carrying that same cautious awareness. She paused when she saw him, as if unsure whether she was allowed to be there. Daniel gave a small nod, not too big, not overwhelming, just enough. "Morning," he said quietly, his voice steady, familiar. She did not respond right away, but she did not retreat either. Instead she stepped a little further into the room. Rex appeared behind her, moving calmly, his presence unchanged. He stayed close but not crowding. Lily's eyes moved around the kitchen, taking in the space in daylight, the details clearer now, less shadow, less unknown. "Did you sleep?" Daniel asked gently. She hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Some," she said, her voice still soft but stronger than the night before. Daniel accepted that, not pressing further. He poured warm water into a cup, letting it settle before placing it on the table. "It is not much, but it will help," he said. She moved closer, slowly, her steps measured, as if she was still learning how to exist in a place that did not demand anything from her. She sat at the edge of the chair, her hands still wrapped in the blanket, and reached for the cup, holding it carefully, the warmth spreading through her fingers. Rex settled nearby, lying down with his head resting on his paws, watching quietly. Daniel leaned against the counter, giving her space but staying present. The morning light filled the room now, soft and steady, and for a moment, everything felt almost normal, almost like something that could last. Then Lily's gaze dropped to her wrist again, her fingers instinctively brushing against the bracelet. Daniel noticed, not because he was looking for it, but because it stood out, even in the calm. "That bracelet," he said gently, not as a question this time, more like an observation. Lily's hand stilled, her shoulders tightening just slightly, but she did not pull away as quickly as before. She looked at it, then back at him, something shifting in her expression, something closer to decision than fear. "It was my mother's," she said quietly, the words carrying more weight than their size. Daniel did not interrupt, did not react beyond listening. She swallowed lightly, her fingers still resting on it. "She told me, if I ever got lost, I should not take it off." Her voice faltered slightly, but she continued. "She said someone would recognize it, someone safe." The room seemed to still around her words. Daniel felt something settle deep in his chest, something that connected pieces he had not yet understood. He pushed himself off the counter slowly, stepping closer but stopping at a respectful distance. "Do you know who that someone is?" he asked, his tone careful, steady. Lily shook her head, a small, uncertain movement. "No. But I think, they are not supposed to find me." The contradiction hung there, quiet but clear. Daniel's eyes moved briefly to Rex, then back to Lily, and for the first time since the night before, he understood that this was not just about shelter, not just about safety. This was something larger, something that had already started long before she appeared in his yard. And as the morning light continued to grow, so did the realization that whatever came next, it was not going to be simple, but he was already part of it, whether he had chosen it or not. The quiet in the kitchen lingered after Lily's words, not heavy, not tense, but thoughtful, like something unseen had just stepped into the room and was waiting to be understood. Daniel did not respond right away. He let the silence sit, let her words breathe, his eyes briefly lowering as he processed what she had said. The bracelet, the warning, the idea that someone safe existed but was not supposed to find her. It did not fit neatly, and that alone told him it mattered. He moved slowly, pulling out the chair across from her and sitting down, not too close, not too far, just enough to be present. "Then we do this carefully," he said at last, his voice calm, measured. "We do not rush into anything, and we do not let anyone decide for you what happens next." Lily looked up at him, her expression uncertain, but there was something else there now, something steadier than fear, something beginning to trust direction. "But if someone is supposed to recognize it," Daniel continued, nodding slightly toward her wrist, "then that means there is a reason it exists, and reasons matter." She followed his gaze to the bracelet again, her fingers brushing over it as if feeling for something more than just the surface. Rex lifted his head slightly, his ears shifting toward the window, alert but not alarmed. Daniel noticed, his instincts sharpening instantly, his posture straightening just a fraction. He did not move quickly, did not create tension, but his awareness shifted. He turned his head slightly, listening. The outside remained quiet, the same morning stillness, but something had changed, not in sound, but in feeling, like a presence just beyond what could be seen. Lily noticed the shift in him, her body tensing again, her eyes moving toward the window. "What is it?" she asked softly. Daniel shook his head once, slow, controlled. "Probably nothing," he said, though his tone carried more focus than dismissal. Rex stood now, moving toward the door, his steps quiet but purposeful. He stopped near it, his head angled slightly, listening in a way only he could. Daniel rose from his chair, not rushing, just steady, moving toward the door. He paused with his hand near the handle, not opening it yet, just feeling the moment, measuring it. Lily stood as well, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders, her eyes fixed on him, waiting. The room seemed to narrow around that single point, that single decision. Daniel finally turned the handle slowly, opening the door just enough to look out. The yard stretched ahead, still, unchanged, the disturbed patch of earth visible in the distance. Nothing moved, no one stood there, just the quiet morning. He stepped out onto the porch, the wood creaking softly beneath his weight, the air cool and clean. He scanned the tree line, the edges of the property, his eyes sharp, trained, searching for anything out of place, but there was nothing obvious, nothing immediate. Rex stepped out beside him, his posture alert but not aggressive. After a moment, Daniel exhaled slowly, some of the tension easing. "It is clear," he said, more to reassure Lily than himself. He turned back toward the door, but as he did, something caught his eye, near the edge of the yard, not far from where the ground had been disturbed, a small glint of light reflecting off something in the grass, subtle, easy to miss, but not to him. His gaze fixed on it, his body stilling again. "Stay inside," he said quietly, his tone firm but not alarming. Lily did not argue, she stepped back slightly, watching him. Rex moved forward immediately, staying close as Daniel stepped off the porch and walked toward the spot, each step deliberate, measured, the distance closing slowly, the glint becoming clearer. A small object, partially hidden in the grass. He crouched down, reaching for it carefully, lifting it into his hand. It was metallic, smooth, and unmistakably deliberate, not something that belonged to the yard, not something that had been there by accident. He turned it slightly, the light catching its surface again, revealing just enough detail to send a quiet understanding through him. This was not random, this was not coincidence. And as he looked back toward the house, toward the open door where Lily stood watching, he realized something had already begun, something neither of them had control over, and whatever it was, it had just come one step closer. Daniel stood still for a moment, the object resting in his palm, the weight of it far heavier than it should have been for something so small. The metal was cool against his skin, smooth and precise, not worn by time or chance, but placed, intentional. He turned it slightly between his fingers, revealing a small engraved symbol, clean, deliberate, unfamiliar yet unmistakably important. Rex remained beside him, silent now but watchful, his body angled toward the tree line as if aware that whatever this was, it did not end here. Daniel exhaled slowly, his instincts no longer questioning but confirming. This was connected, to the girl, to the bracelet, to the way she had said they were not supposed to find her. He closed his hand gently around the object and stood, his gaze lifting once more across the yard, scanning, measuring. Nothing moved, nothing revealed itself, but the quiet no longer felt empty, it felt occupied. He turned and walked back toward the house, each step steady, controlled, not rushed, but no longer uncertain. Lily stood just inside the doorway, exactly where he had left her, her small figure wrapped in the blanket, her eyes fixed on him with a mix of fear and something else, something closer to recognition, as if she already knew what he had found without seeing it. Daniel stepped onto the porch, the wood creaking softly beneath him, then crossed the threshold, closing the door behind him with a quiet but firm motion, the kind that marked a line, inside and outside. Before and after, Rex followed, positioning himself between Lily and the door without needing to be told. Daniel opened his hand slowly, revealing the object, holding it at a level she could see but not forcing it toward her. Lily's breath caught slightly, her eyes widening just enough to confirm what he already suspected. "You have seen this before," Daniel said, not as a question but as a quiet statement. Lily nodded, almost immediately, her fingers tightening around the blanket. "They wear those," she whispered, her voice carrying a weight that made the room feel smaller. Daniel's jaw set slightly, not in fear, but in focus. "Who are they?" he asked again, his tone still calm but firmer now, grounded in what he held in his hand. Lily hesitated, her gaze dropping briefly, then lifting again, this time steadier. "People who do not want to be seen," she said, her words simple but precise. Daniel absorbed that, the meaning settling into place alongside everything else. He closed his hand again, slipping the object into his pocket, not out of sight, but out of immediate reach. Then he stepped a little closer, stopping at that same careful distance he had maintained since the beginning. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low but unwavering. "Whatever this is, whatever they want, they are not taking you from here." Lily looked at him, really looked this time, not searching, not testing, but seeing, as if trying to understand how someone could say something like that and mean it. Rex shifted slightly, pressing closer to her side, grounding her without overwhelming her. Daniel continued, "You said someone safe would recognize that bracelet." He nodded toward her wrist. "Maybe that someone was not who your mother expected." Lily's brow furrowed slightly, confusion flickering across her face. Daniel did not smile, did not soften the moment, he let it stand as it was, real. "Maybe it was never about them finding you," he added quietly, "maybe it was about you finding someone who would not turn away." The words settled between them, not loud, not dramatic, but solid. Lily's grip on the blanket loosened just slightly, her shoulders lowering in a way they had not before. The fear was still there, but it no longer stood alone. It stood beside something else now, something steadier, something beginning to take shape. Daniel moved past her then, toward the window, his eyes scanning the yard again, the same space, the same trees, but now it meant something different. Now it held a line that would not be crossed without resistance. He rested one hand lightly against the frame, his posture calm but ready. Rex remained where he was, close to Lily, his presence unshaken. And in the quiet that followed, the house no longer felt like a place of waiting, it felt like a place of decision, a place where something had already begun to change, and for the first time in a long time, Daniel Hayes was not standing at the edge of his life wondering what came next. He was standing in the middle of it, choosing it, one steady breath at a time.